So I'm standing here in the parking lot at Auschwitz in Poland. I came through for a conference in Bratislava earlier this week, an international conservatism summit where I was asked to do a presentation about South Africa and some of the work that we're doing at the Solidarity Movement. So after the conference, I came through to Krakow in Poland, which isn't too far from Auschwitz, for some meetings and networking opportunities and so forth. And so I figured if I'm here, I should certainly take some time to visit Auschwitz. I'm at the camp now. You can see some of the buildings there behind me and the entrance. And I have to say, driving here, I was listening to an audiobook in the car. And the moment we reached the camps, you can immediately see them and recognize that you are now at Auschwitz. And it had a very striking effect on me. I had to switch off the audiobook immediately and just recognize where I am and what has happened here. My plan is not to make a documentary or something to that effect, but to take some photos and some videos, but not too much, and to exchange my experience and what I've learned with you as we go along. So we finished our tour. I'm standing currently in Birkenau, which many people just regard as part of Auschwitz, even though it's technically a different camp. You can see the buildings in the background housing the people. Now where we are right now, you can see a platform, all the concrete here. Used to be a wooden building that housed Jewish women and children between the ages of 2 and 16. In 1944, it says here there were about 200 children who lived here in this little space. Many of them, I think the majority of them, were twins. And one of the Nazi doctors and scientists, Mengele, did use them to do experiments. Now, I want to share some thoughts about visiting this place. I'm not going to try to give you the history of Auschwitz. You can read that online, but just to share some ideas with you. And it will be scattered thoughts. I will work on something more concrete and comprehensive and share that on the podcast, the Pioneer podcast. Let me first say that it's quite cold. I'm happy to see that the sun is coming out a little bit now, but I'm wearing 3 layers of clothing, and I was shivering. Even now, holding this camera, my hand is feels almost frozen. Now I can just imagine, it's November now. Imagine if it was December, January, middle of the winter, having to live here, walk around here with just 1 layer of thin clothing or no clothes at all. And then the paradox that they had living here of appreciating the snow because it had water. So if there was snow, you could wash your hands, you could be a bit cleaner, you could have something to drink, but you could also freeze to death, as many did. Now, there's a series of books in Afrikaans wrote by a very well-known author named F.R. Venter. And I actually don't know if the books have been translated. It's Geknelde Land. The names of the books are firstly Geknelde Land, Offerland, then Gelofte Land, and then the fourth one is Bedoelde Land. And it tells the story of the Great Trek. But it's a novel. It's written as a novel. And I mention this because as a child reading these books, I resonated very much with a young boy named Bux. So the story is about this family during the Great Trek, and the father is Rudolf Dreyer and his family, and it's the story of the Afrikaners after the annexation of the Cape, moving into the interior of South Africa. So it's based on real events. And it's the story of this father named Rudolf and his family. And one of his sons is named Bux. And I resonated with Bux because I was about as old as he was growing up, reading the book. And now reading those books again, reading them for my children, it's a completely different experience because now I'm not Bux anymore. I am Rudolf. I read them from the perspective of the father. And in a way, it makes the books and the tragedy that's also in these books so much more striking. And it's the same with the story of the concentration camps. Growing up and reading about them or watching movies about them or documentaries, you think about it from the perspective as a child and how horrible, how horrific it was and how horrific it would have been. But there's something else when you think about this from the perspective of an adult, of a father with young children. Now, by no means would I suggest that it's worse for an adult than for a child. In many ways, it's much worse for children, especially physically. But there's something to be said about being a parent and thinking about events such as these. And so when we were at Auschwitz, just down the road, there are some chambers, and I tried not to take too many photos and videos. I took some where I knew it wouldn't be a problem, but I didn't take photos and videos inside too much. And there were some chambers that I've heard of, like one with, it's almost like a warehouse, a massive room that still contains the hairs of women that were cut there. And, you're just in awe of how big this chamber is. And there was one with glasses of people, glasses that were taken off before they were killed. And one with these tin bowls that they used for washing or eating or drinking. And several such chambers with collections of items. And I tried not to focus too much on the history and the details, but to imagine this from the perspective of an individual person. So there was this, as I said, a collection of glasses, just this big heap of glasses. And I think what I tried to do was to look at these glasses and to look at a particular set of glasses and try to imagine whose glasses that was. Where did that person come from? What was his or her story? And so the journey was, in a sense, much more emotional to me. But I have to say, what really, really had an impact on me that was unexpected were the shoes. Now, I know I've been to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, where there's also a chamber with shoes. This one, I'm trying to remember the amount, but thousands and thousands of shoes of the victims. Now, I knew of this, but what truly struck me was the next room, which were filled with the shoes of little children. Now, as I said, I'm a parent. I have 4 children, and looking at these shoes, seeing, looking at the different sizes, some very small and for only toddlers, others bigger for teenagers, young children, and so forth. This, for me personally, had the single biggest impact on me. And so, I've seen many documentaries and films, and I've read some books about this place. But I would really suggest and recommend people, if they have the opportunity, to come here to experience it for themselves. And I think I'll end. Before I end, let me just make a quick comment about the historical accuracy of a memorial like this and the public discourse on the history and the history of the Second World War and trying to make sense of what happened here. I don't know if Holocaust denialism is making a comeback. In other words, I don't know if there's more, if it's more now or more severe now than it was, but you do experience that. Now, there's absolutely no way that you can deny that this happened. I mean, I'm standing here in the place where these buildings are constructed. You can see the furnaces. We went into the gas chambers. You can see the walls where the people were executed. You see the gates with the slogan "Arbeid maakt vrij," or "Work or labor makes you free." The best or the worst that you can do that might have some element of credibility is to argue about the numbers, to say, well, it happened, but the numbers, are not accurate, or something to that effect. But that doesn't really achieve much, because if it's true, for the sake of the argument, that there were fewer people who died here than what you read in some book, does that mean that it's not a problem? Does it mean that it wasn't a very serious atrocity? And so I think we live in an era now where, for good reason, people have started to distrust experts, because a lot of experts in the last few years especially have spoken a lot of nonsense. And so people just don't trust experts anymore. People only trust themselves. And there's something good in that, but there's also a serious problem in that if we don't also recognize our history and learn from that. And so, as I said, I'll make a more comprehensive video with some more bigger picture thoughts, because this is very important, because the world is still trying to make sense of the Second World War, and especially the world is still trying to make sense of what happened here where I'm standing. And in a sense, this little, well, it's not a little place, but this spot where I'm standing has changed the course of history to such an extent that it has changed politics all over the world. It has changed the way people think about philosophy, about history, about social issues, about contemporary issues like borders and so forth. And it seems as if we cannot get over our attempts to make sense of the Second World War. And when I say get over, I don't mean forget about it. I mean making sense of it and learning from it and moving on. And so with that, I'll close with a remark that I really thought of while walking up and down in this place by the Afrikaans thinker and philosopher N.P. van Wyk Louw, whom I have mentioned on this channel a few times and will continue to do, who wrote about tradition. And he said there are three ways in which we can live with regard to tradition. The one is to live in tradition. And the second would be to live outside of tradition. Now, the difference herein is living in tradition means that you live in the past. You live in such a way that you get stuck in the past, where you cannot think for yourself anymore. And living outside of tradition implies living as if no one before you has contemplated or thought of anything before, as if the past doesn't matter. And the third way is to live from tradition, to recognize that we are rooted in tradition, and that tradition helps us to make sense of the world. And it's the same with history. We can live in history, get stuck in history, refusing to move on, refusing to move forward. We can live outside of history, where we're just stuck in the here and the now, as if history has never happened, as if we're not shaped by history. And I cannot decide which of these two is worse. And then there's a third option, which is to live from history. In other words, to learn about history, to talk about history, to try to make sense of history, but to recognize that history is history. History has shaped us, but that we live in a particular time and in a particular place, and that we need to do what we can do with the time that was given to us, the time that we have, with the talents that we have, to learn from the past and to use what we can find in the past to try to ensure that the bad things or the ugly things do not repeat themselves, and that the good things that we can find in the past will be preserved for the future.